Welcome. I'm Tracy Smith, and this is Here Comes the Sun, a closer look at some of the people, places, and things we bring you every weekend on Sunday morning. Comedic legend Steve Martin has starred in more than 40 films, crisscrossed the country on sold-out comedy tours, and released the first platinum comedy album. But Steve told me, before he rose in Hollywood, he didn't think he had any talent. Near the beginning of the first film, you say, "I guarantee I had no talent."
Yes.
None.
I stand by that. Well, meaning I couldn't sing, dance, or act.
Good evening and welcome. My name is Steve Martin.
Steve Martin.
I am a wild and crazy.
So what do you think if you had no talent? What did you have?
A love of show business.
Later in the show, Steve Martin on his relationship with his father. In both of the films, you talk a lot about your dad and how your dad never could really give you a compliment.
He had a hard time until later.
Did that fuel you?
No, but it didn't dissuade me. I just figure generation gap. And also, I sort of got it because I wasn't 100% perfect. You know, if you come off stage, you know there's elements that weren't working that are working. But then when success started to come, that was something my father could understand.
We stay in New York for a visit to one of the city's most popular spots, Central Park. Nancy Giles met up with Christian Cooper, perhaps better known as the Central Park birder, to discuss the racially charged viral video that made him famous and the winged species he'd rather talk about.
For Christian Cooper, the woods in Central Park's ramble have always been a sanctuary, and the birds who make their way here, his obsession and delight.
What's that and?
That's a blue jay. I like to think of it as sort of the Rihanna bird, because if you ever heard Rihanna sing Shut Up and Drive, and she says, "So if you want me, let me know, no." The bird is kind of going, Jay, Jay, Jay.
That's all coming up right here on Here Comes the Sun. Steve Martin's been making stage and screen audiences laugh for over 5 decades. One of those audience members was filmmaker Morgan Neville, a fan since childhood, who convinced Martin to allow him to create a documentary about his life and career. I sat down with both Martin and Neville to learn more about their journey. Okay, you don't usually associate the sound of the banjo with the view of New York City, but with Steve Martin, it all seems to work. He played for us at his apartment, and to everyone there, he sounded amazing.
I blew it there. You got it.
But to him, it wasn't quite good enough. In some ways, it sums up how Steve Martin has lived his whole life.
Well, excuse me.
And now you can see for yourself. A new Apple TV project, Steve Martin, a documentary in 2 pieces,
You better pull yourself together.
traces his path from anxious kid to the superstar we've come to know.
You know, I have figured out one thing that would totally put an end to show business, and that is if the human race, instead of having 2 arms, just had 1 arm right in the center of our body. Now, the reason that would put an end to show business, how would people clap? Be,
Near the beginning of the first film, you say, "I guarantee I had no talent."
Yes.
None.
I stand by that. Well, meaning I couldn't sing, dance, or act.
Good evening and welcome. My name is Steve Martin.
Steve Martin.
I am a wild and crazy.
So what do you think if you had no talent? What did you have?
A love of show business.
Why don't I interview you as we're driving? It's called Viking, but sure.
Martin tells his story with the help of filmmaker Morgan Neville, whom you may know as the director of the 2018 Fred Rogers doc, Won't You Be My Neighbor? So you kind of heard through the grapevine that Steve maybe would be interested?
I heard that somebody in an elevator asked Steve if he was interested in doing a documentary.
Are you serious?
That is true. And he said maybe. And that was the crack in the door.
It's more than just a crack. Neville got all of Martin's early performances, his detailed diaries, and a good chunk of his time. You've been a fan since you were 12 years old?
Yeah, even younger. When I was 12, I convinced my dad to drive me to Las Vegas to see Steve do stand-up at the Riviera.
Wow.
So I actually got to see Steve do stand-up. I actually went to the early show and the late show that same night.
I was at both of those shows too.
And you also said this is one of the things that maybe you discovered more about with Steve. You're so modest.
I think you have to be. I remember Mike Nichols told me once, he said, when I'm in New York, I'm Mike Nichols. When I go to LA, I'm thinking, how am I doing?
Seems Steve took that to heart. By the late 70s, Steve Martin was wildly successful beyond even his dreams.
We are two wild and crazy guys.
He was a fixture on Saturday Night Live.
The obsequious, purple and clairvoyant.
His comedy tours would sell out coast to coast. His stand-up record, Let's Get Small, was the first comedy album to go platinum. And then he left the stage. Not to give anything away, but the end of the first film is you're walking away from stand-up.
Right.
Why'd you walk away?
I was exhausted by it, and I thought, wow, when I do stand-up, I have to go there. If I do a movie, I stay home and the movie goes there. And also, it had a sense of permanence, like you could get the thing exactly right.
I don't really know karate.
I didn't think so.
So Steve Martin went from stand-up king to movie star.
'Cause I'm a dentist and a sex sale.
But he still had his moments of self-doubt.
Why don't we just calm down now, sir?
I'll tell you why we don't calm down. Because you're not excited. It takes two people for a we to calm down, doesn't it?
There's this one moment in there where this journalist says to you, hey, Steve, one question.
Yeah.
Why aren't you funny anymore?
Yeah. It was a bad moment because I was thinking that myself.
Were you really?
Sure,
Why? What was that moment?
Well, you go through highs and lows in your career. So at any moment, you could be thinking, everything's working, everything's feeling great. And then, a year later, you're going,
Bang, bang, Maxwell Silverhammer came down upon her.
But there have been plenty of highs.
We obviously have mutual control over our body.
Our body. It's my body. I'm not sharing my body with anyone.
Everybody's going to be real disappointed.
Martin's made more than 40 films, some of which are now considered comedy classics.
Well, they're just intimidated. They've only seen us on the big screen.
Sometimes I sort of look around and go, how did this happen? Where did this come in? And I go, in my most self-congratulatory moment, I go, it all came out of my head.
At 78, he's on a hit TV show. He's back doing stand-up with Martin Short, and he has, by his own admission, mellowed with age. One of the things you talk about a lot in the second film is that you've changed, and your friends talk about it too.
Mm-hmm.
And I think at one point you say, I wasn't mean, I was just removed?
Yeah, I would say.
What do you mean?
I remember Tommy Smothers said once, because I was writing on this show, he said, talking to Steve Martin is like talking to nobody. But no, I have changed. I don't know how to quantify it. I'm just nicer, friendlier. I have this theory that as you age, you either become your worst self or your best self. And I feel like I've become my better self, and I can see other people becoming their worst self. They become more hostile, they become more difficult, and it's a pretty clear line for me. I was after that quality that is indefinable, where you say, I don't know why it was funny, but it was.
Yeah, he says he has no talent, but with his life, Steve Martin's created a masterpiece. What did you learn about Steve through this process?
Well, nothing.
Nothing? Then why do it? What was the point of doing it?
Well, it's part of being in show business,
But there's something more to it for that, because you don't fall for these trappings of show business. You know what I'm saying? You didn't have to do this.
Yeah. No, it's a fantastic outcome to have a documentary done about you.
So is this kind of what you do? A documentary is just a natural progression?
I used to watch, I'd still watch American Masters thinking, wow, one day I'd like to be a subject of a documentary. And then suddenly you are. And I'm 78. When else?
Up next, an exclusive excerpt from my chat with Steve Martin and filmmaker Morgan Neville, something you can only see right here on Here Comes the Sun. Stay with us.
Your father was so much fun. He was so funny and so enjoyable. And my response was, he was?
As promised, here's more from my interview with Steve Martin and filmmaker Morgan Neville. So the first part is this just fascinating archaeological dig into your career in stand-up. Had you looked through, there are these tapes and notebooks, even a diary from 1975.
Steve actually saved more than he thinks he saved. I mean,
I did. One of the things I got out of this was a 11 terabyte hard drive with everything digitized. And I didn't know I had all this stuff,
I think we scanned 5,000 things at your
Jeez,
house.
yeah.
But all the audio cassettes, because you would go in your early stand-up days and just leave a tape recorder going.
Well, I would at certain times. I would. I don't know if we had those. I did it later, but I would record my show like at the Troubadour on a cassette, and then dutifully, I hated to do it, but listen to it back. And the one thing I learned was no drinking.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
How did you learn that?
Well, it'd be like second show, and I did a bit with a glass of wine, like I was a Playboy or something. And so the waitress at the Troubadour would just bring me up a glass of wine. And then I heard the tape back, and just a little bit like that. And I never do that again, and I didn't.
That's great. There is a value to, even though it's painful to listen to that.
Yeah, it's painful to listen back.
And is it painful for you to listen to those old tapes now?
I don't listen to them. It would be painful.
But Morgan made you listen to some of them.
Well, I had to listen on camera. Yeah, you're right.
It lasted about 3 minutes.
Yeah, I think I said, I can't do this.
Why?
It's very hard to look back. Because the premise is you get better. And so the further back you go, theoretically, the worse you are. And I don't know, I just don't need it. I don't know, I don't need it.
In both of the films, you talk a lot about your dad and how your dad never could really give you a compliment.
He had a hard time until later.
Did that fuel you?
No, but it didn't dissuade me. I just figure generation gap. And also, I sort of got it because I wasn't 100% perfect. If you come off stage, there's elements that weren't working, that are working. But then when success started to come, that was something my father could understand. He could put the aesthetic judgment over here, but the success, was undeniable. My mother once said to me, I was at Neiman Marcus the other day, and when they found out I was your mother, they got so excited. And I'm thinking, how'd they find out you were my mother? Because she told them.
Was that nice to hear?
Yeah, it was, happy for her.
And I know you've talked about this in your other works. You wrote this beautiful New Yorker piece about your dad.
Right.
So I wonder, with this film, do you feel like it changed how you saw him or how you thought about it?
Well, I had already changed how I saw him long ago. We had a good rapport as he got older. I took him out for lunch every day, and he had a sense of humor. When he died, people came to me and goes, your father was so much fun. He was so funny and so enjoyable. And my response was, he was? I never saw that.
You chose to put a lot of the vulnerable moments, a lot of the, let's say, failures in this film. Why focus on that?
Because we learn from failure. I think...
How much failure is in there? Jeez.
Too much, apparently.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
But...
Not too late.
But part of it is, what is a failure at the time doesn't necessarily make it a failure in a life.
Up next, the early bird gets the worm. Welcome back. More than 3 years ago, birdwatcher Christian Cooper made national headlines when he recorded an interaction with a white woman who refused to leash her dog in Central Park. The viral video highlighted the undercurrent of racial bias across the country. Here's Nancy Giles.
New York's Central Park is an oasis of green in one of the world's busiest cities, drawing millions of visitors from around the world, including more than 280 species of birds, many of which make this a regular stop on their annual migrations.
They're passing through New York City and they see the sea of concrete and they're like, where am I gonna go? And then they see this and they're like,
oh, and they all hit right there.
They all hit right here.
For Christian Cooper, the woods in Central Park's Ramble have always been a sanctuary, and the birds who make their way here, his obsession and delight.
What's that
That's a blue jay. I like to think of it as sort of the Rihanna bird, because if you ever heard Rihanna sing Shut Up and Drive, and she says, so if you want me, let me know, no. The bird is kind of going, Jay, Jay, Jay.
It's been more than 3 years since Christian Cooper made national news.
Tonight, a white woman who wrongfully called the police on a black man in New York City's Central Park.
As the black man who recorded this video when a white woman refused his request to comply with park rules and put her dog on a leash.
Please don't come close to me.
Sir, I'm asking you to stop recording me.
Please don't come close to me.
Please take your phone off.
Please don't come close to me.
I mean, you had your phone.
I had this. And so I was like, all right, well then I'm gonna record your scofflaw behavior of your dog being off the leash. You know, I had no idea she was gonna take it to a racial place.
I'm gonna tell them there's an African-American man threatening my life.
Please tell them whatever you like.
Once she did, I was like, okay, so I can either stop recording like she wants me to and hope that that makes all this go away, you know, capitulate to that racial intimidation, or I can keep doing what I'm doing until that dog is on the leash.
He is recording me and threatening myself and my dog.
By the time the police arrived at the scene, both the woman and Christian Cooper had left.
Initially, my reaction was, you know what, I just want to crawl under a rock and hide until this blows over.
But George Floyd's brutal murder in Minneapolis would take place just hours later.
And I realized that was not the proper response.
Christian Cooper's video, first posted by his sister Melody, went viral.
I'm being threatened by a man in the Ramble. Please send the cops immediately.
For better or worse, it highlighted the undercurrent of racial bias that still exists deeply in our society. And that's what we need to focus on. That bias, same kind of racial bias, made a white police officer in Minneapolis think that it was okay to kneel on a black man's neck until he was dead. Made the other cops around him think it was okay to stand by and do nothing. And George Floyd couldn't talk about it. Breonna Taylor couldn't talk about it. Ahmaud Arbery couldn't talk about it, but I could.
I'm Christian Cooper, and I am a birder.
These days, Christian Cooper's focus is back on his beloved birds. He hosts a National Geographic series, traveling far and wide to explore the wonders of birds.
And along the way, I'll show you what I adore about these crazy smart, dazzling, and super-powered feathered creatures.
And he's written a memoir about growing up on Long Island and the existential loneliness of being a closeted gay teenager.
That was a hard thing, growing up knowing that in the 1970s.
Yes. I remember the kind of things kids would say to other kids.
And in what can be very conservative Long Island. So it was a hard place to be.
How did you cope?
A lot of escapism. Part of it was getting out into nature. That was incredibly healing.
Science fiction helped his imagination take flight.
Oh my God, Star Wars came out at just the right time.
And may I ask you, how many times did you see Star Wars?
I have seen Star Wars in the theaters 41 times. And then when the first sequel came out, The Empire Strikes Back, by the second night it had opened, I had seen it 4 times. So yes, I was a little bit of an addict.
What was that otherworldliness attraction about?
It just opens up new possibilities that you can imagine, and that can be important, because if you can imagine something different, then maybe someday we can get there.
Kirk here. Captain.
He credits the TV show Star Trek, particularly Mr. Spock, with helping him keep his cool during the confrontation in Central Park.
A Vulcan's mental discipline is to suppress emotion
right.
and act only rationally
right.
and logically.
And that's why when she said, I'm going to tell the police that an African American man is assaulting me, you were able to just go, basically.
Spock also helped him survive his childhood.
Here I was, a nerdy, brainy kid, and here's a character on this TV show who's, one of the heroes of the show, and he's all about the intellect. He's all about the brains. So that was really appealing to me, to the point that I spent hours as a child in front of the mirror, going like this, trying to learn to be able to raise one eyebrow without the other. And guess what? I mastered it.
You got it. Wait, do it again.
You keep your eyes on the bird, and you bring the binoculars to your eyes, and then boom.
The incident in Central Park has not dampened his enthusiasm for this place or for his avian friends.
It's a window into the world that people don't always have.
I'm Tracy Smith. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you here next time on Here Comes the Sun.